Running some 40,000 kilometers around the circumference of our planet is an imaginary line that splits the Earth into two hemispheres. Quite simply, below this line is the southern hemisphere and above it the northern. Across this arbitrary made-up line, you will find 13 countries in total. The countries that have territory on this line are known as equatorial. However, funnily enough, Equatorial Guinea is not found on the equator. What's even rarer than an equatorial country is an equatorial capital city, which would mean a capital that has a latitude of 0 degrees. Which, spoiler alert, doesn't actually exist. So if no capitals sit directly on the equator, which are found the closest to the equator? Let's find out. Oh, and by the way, if the latitude begins with a minus, it means it's in the southern hemisphere. No minus, of course, means it's found in the north. So starting off with number 10, we have Mogadishu, the capital city of Somalia, with a latitude of 2.03 degrees. So Mogadishu sits around 400 kilometers north of the equator. It is the most populated city in the country with a metro population of some 2.7 million. It is found in the southeast of the country along its coastline with the Indian Ocean. So travelling some 1800 kilometers southwest, we arrive at the capital city who is the 9th closest to the equator, Kigali of Rwanda, with a latitude of minus 1.93 degrees. So to get from Mogadishu to Kigali, we have now officially crossed the equator into the southern hemisphere. Unlike Mogadishu, that is a coastal city, Kigali is found slap bang in the middle of the country. Its population is around 1.2 million. Kigali is one of the most standout capital cities on the continent, but why exactly? Well, generally speaking, most capitals on Earth, let alone Africa, are loud, busy, and chaotic. However, Kigali is quite the opposite. In the last couple of decades, it has transformed into what is now known as one of Africa's cleanest, safest, and most organised capital cities. Quite the difference to our previous capital, Mogadishu. So now we pack our bags and travel some nearly 16,000 kilometers east to find Tarawa of Kiribati, who is the capital city 8th closest to the equator, with a latitude of 1.43 degrees, meaning we are back in the northern hemisphere. Now, Tarawa couldn't be any more different to the previous two capitals mentioned. It is a very low-lying atoll found within the central Pacific Ocean. The population is estimated to be around 70,000, which of course is absolutely tiny compared to Kigali or Mogadishu. However, its density is actually similar to that of Tokyo or Hong Kong. As the island is so small, there is relatively a lot of people living within one tight space. Travelling 7,700 kilometers west, we arrive at the 7th closest capital to the equator, Singapore, which is an island city-state, so therefore the capital is itself Singapore. Its latitude is 1.28 degrees. Now, I visited Singapore a few years back and my god, it was possibly the single most humid place I've ever been to. The population of this city-state is around 6 million. It is world famous for its wealth, strong business mentality, and fascinating architecture. It is by far the wealthiest and most developed out of all of the capitals mentioned in today's video. Travelling some 7,500 kilometers west, we arrive back in Africa, Nairobi, Kenya specifically, who, with a latitude of minus 1.28 degrees, is the 6th closest capital to the equator. At around 5.5 million, Nairobi is easily the most populated city in the country. Nairobi is also perhaps one of the most famous capitals on the continent, due to it being known as the safari capital of the world. Nairobi is the gateway to seeing some of the planet's greatest animals. Number 5. Yaren, Nauru, with a latitude of minus 0.53 degrees. Now, Nauru doesn't actually officially have a capital. However, with many of its important and governmental buildings being found in Yaren, it is classed as the de facto capital. So Nauru is easily one of the least known countries on Earth. It ranks as the 3rd smallest in terms of size and population. The only two smaller countries are Vatican City and Monaco, which, although incredibly small, are very well known. So Yaren looks like this. It is easily the smallest city mentioned in today's video. Number 4. Libreville, Gabon, with a latitude of 0.38 degrees. So Libreville sits just above the equator in the northern hemisphere. It is found in the very northwest of the country, just south of the border with Equatorial Guinea. Libreville isn't just the capital, but the country's largest city too. Its population is close to 900,000, which is pretty substantial given the fact that only around 2.5 million people live within this country. Number 3. Sao Tome and Principe, with a latitude of 0.33 degrees. So yet another African capital city, but this time it's an island country found just west of our previous capital, Libreville. Sao Tome is found in the northeast of the country's largest island. The Portuguese translation of the city is Saint Thomas. The city is sometimes referred to as the Havana of Africa due to how colourful it is. The population of the city is around 60,000, that's about a quarter of the country's entire population. Travelling directly 2,900 kilometers east back to the mainland, we find the capital city that is the second closest to the equator on Earth, Kampala, Uganda, with a latitude of 0.3 degrees. Now, Kampala is a rather big city with a population of some 4 million, easily the largest in the country. The city sits on the shores of Lake Victoria, which is Africa's largest lake. Outside the city you'll find lush green hills, whereas inside you'll actually find some quite contemporary looking skyscrapers. And finally, the capital city that is found closest to the equator. Can you guess which continent it is on? It is actually the first and only South American capital on this list, Quito of Ecuador, with a latitude of -0.25 degrees. So Quito is found ever so slightly further south than the equator line. The equator actually runs through what is known as the middle of the world city, some 26 kilometers north of Quito. Now, although Quito is found on the equator, it is nowhere near as hot as some other capitals mentioned in this video, purely because it is found so high up. In fact, some 2,850 meters high. So temperatures throughout the year are pretty mild and livable, although the UV index is through the roof most days. So there we have it, the 10 closest capital cities to the equator. Have you visited any of these? If so, what was it like? If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to drop a like, and if you love learning about cities and countries from around the world, consider subscribing. It is completely free and you can always unsubscribe if you get bored. And as always, thank you very much for watching.